Sure. Here's the beginning of the story, written according to your guidelines. I'll continue once you press continue. The rain came down in thick sheets, blurring the neon glow of the restaurant's sign as I ran into the parking lot, my breath hitching in my throat. My shoes, cheap and worn from too many shifts, slid against the wet pavement, but I didn't stop. The black tablet in my hands was slick from the rain, its weight pressing against my palms. "Wait!" I shouted, my voice barely carrying over the downpour. The man in the hoodie paused, his hand on the Tesla's door handle. He turned, and for the first time, the streetlights cast his face into clear view. My heart lurched. I knew that face. Elon Musk. The tablet in my hands suddenly felt radioactive. My fingers twitched as my gaze flicked, involuntarily, to the screen. I hadn't meant to look. I hadn't wanted to see. But I did. Diagrams, complex technical schematics, neural interfaces, something that looked eerily like a medical device. My pulse pounded in my ears as my brain struggled to make sense of it. He strode towards me, his movements sharp and purposeful. "Give me that." I barely had time to extend the tablet before he yanked it from my grasp, his expression unreadable, his eyes sharp as they flickered over my face. "You didn't see anything." His voice was low, controlled. I started. But before I could form a coherent thought, he turned, slid into his car, and drove off, tires kicking up water in his wake. I stood there, my uniform soaked through, my fingers still curled in the empty space where the tablet had been. What the hell had I just seen? I didn't know then that this moment, this one small act of returning a forgotten tablet, was going to change my life. But I would find out soon enough. See. My name is Maisie Chen, and I used to be just a waitress. Just a single mom trying to make ends meet, juggling 12-hour shifts at Luminescence, one of the fanciest restaurants in Silicon Valley. I didn't care about billionaires or their secrets. I cared about keeping the lights on. I cared about making sure my 6-year-old daughter, Lily, had the medicine she needed. But now my life was unraveling faster than I could hold it together. I lost my job the very next day. "I'm sorry, Maisie, but we have to let you go." Mr. Harrison, the restaurant owner, wouldn't even look me in the eye as he slid a termination letter across the desk. "But why? I haven't done anything wrong." "We received a complaint about unprofessional conduct," he said, his voice clipped. My stomach twisted. "This is about the tablet, isn't it?" I demanded. The man standing behind him, dressed in an expensive black suit, spoke for the first time. His voice was smooth, practiced. "Miss Chen, you viewed confidential information. That's a violation of privacy. We're willing to offer you a generous severance package, provided you sign this." He slid a tablet towards me. A non-disclosure agreement. My hands curled into fists. "I didn't view anything. I barely glanced at the screen." The man tilted his head, watching me with cool detachment. "Then this should be no problem for you. Sign the NDA, and you'll receive a settlement. Refuse, and, well, let's not make this difficult." Fear slithered down my spine. "If I don't sign?" I asked. His smile was thin. "Then the severance is off the table, and we will have to consider other measures to protect our interests." Other measures. I thought about Lily, about the bills piling up, about the new treatment her doctor had told me about yesterday, the one that could actually help. But something was very, very wrong. So I pushed the tablet back toward him. "I need time to think." His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "You have 24 hours." I walked out of that office with my heart pounding, my head spinning. When I checked my phone, there was a single unread email from an address I didn't recognize. Check your spam folder at midnight. I swallowed hard, my hands shaking as I gripped my phone. Someone knew. Someone was watching. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the tablet screen, the diagrams, the neural interfaces, the complex medical annotations. Something about them gnawed at the edges of my mind, something familiar. But it wasn't until I heard Lily's soft voice in the darkness that I realized what it was. "Mommy, you forgot to hang up your wet clothes again." I turned my head and found her standing beside my bed, tiny fingers poking at my shoulder, her brown eyes serious beneath messy bangs. My uniform lay in a damp heap by the door, a dark stain on the already worn carpet of our tiny apartment. I groaned and sat up, running a hand down my face. "Sorry, baby. How are you feeling?" "Better," she said, holding out her arms. "My spots don't itch as much." I looked at the reddish patches on her skin, symptoms of the genetic disorder that had defined her short life. The doctors still didn't know how to treat it properly, but the new cream seemed to be helping. I checked my phone. 11:58 p.m. The email. I stood up so fast my vision swam. "Lily, get back in bed, okay? I'll be there in a second." She yawned but nodded, crawling under her blanket while I sat at the kitchen table and opened my spam folder. One new message. It had no sender, no subject. I clicked it. The text was short. "Your father's password was your mother's birthday, but backward. Check the files. The truth is in them." My breath caught in my throat. My father, Dr. James Chen. He had been a scientist, a researcher working on something groundbreaking, until he died in a car accident when I was 15. After that, his work disappeared. His notes, his research, everything. But now, staring at the message, I felt a terrible certainty bloom in my chest. His work hadn't disappeared. It had been stolen, and Elon Musk had it. I had to get those files. The next morning, I was barely functioning. I got Lily ready for school, my mind racing with 100 possibilities. Then, right as I was about to drop her off, she tugged on my sleeve. "Mrs. Garcia can't watch me today," she said, chewing on her lip. "She said she's scared of the men in the black car." My blood ran cold. "What black car?" She pointed across the street. A black SUV sat idling, its tinted windows reflecting the gray morning light. I grabbed her hand, squeezing hard. "Change of plans, baby. You're coming with me today." I didn't know where to go. I couldn't go home. Couldn't go to the restaurant. My phone kept buzzing with calls from unknown numbers. My name was all over social media. Someone had leaked the story about my firing. Justice for Maisie was trending, but mixed in with the support were other messages. "Watch your back. Some secrets are worth killing for. Take the deal before it's too late." I pulled Lily closer as we slipped into the public library, my heart hammering. Then my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from an unknown number. "Treatment offer expires at midnight. Choose wisely." "Maisie Chen," I jumped at the voice. A woman slid into the seat across from me. She was young, with close-cropped hair and intelligent eyes. "Who are you?" I asked, my body tensing. "Dakota Wells," she said, lowering her voice. "Investigative reporter. I think you're in danger." I let out a bitter laugh. "You think?" She pulled out a laptop. "You're not the first person this has happened to." On the screen, a series of news articles appeared. Different names, different dates, but the same pattern. Regular people who had brief encounters with Musk or his companies. People who lost their jobs, received mysterious job offers, then disappeared from public view. Their social media accounts wiped, their families refusing to comment. They had all signed NDAs, all taken jobs with his companies. And none of them were ever heard from again in any meaningful way, Dakota said quietly. I swallowed hard. What are you saying? I'm saying you have a choice. Take the offer, sign the papers, disappear. She met my eyes. Or help me expose whatever they're hiding. I wanted to tell her no. But then Lily gasped, doubling over in pain. Mommy, it hurts. I turned to her, my stomach lurching in terror. The spots on her arms were turning an angry purple. We need to get her to a doctor, I choked out. Dakota nodded. Come on, I know a place. We left through the back, my heart pounding as the black SUV in the parking lot started its engine. The clinic was small, tucked away in a quiet part of Oakland. Dr. Marcus Wong, a genetic specialist, examined Lily's rash with a deep frown. This pattern, he murmured. I've never seen this before. He pulled up a scientific paper on his computer, pointing at a name on the screen. Dr. James Chen, my father. He was working on something revolutionary, Dr. Wong said, his voice urgent. A way to use neural interfaces to correct genetic disorders. But after he died, all his research disappeared. My chest tightened. It didn't disappear, I whispered. It was stolen. Before Dr. Wong could respond, there was a sharp knock at the clinic's front door. Through the frosted glass, I saw dark silhouettes. Men in suits. Back door, Dakota hissed, already grabbing our bags. We ran. That night, after we found temporary refuge in Dakota's grandmother's abandoned house, my phone buzzed again. A new email. This time, it was from Elon Musk himself. I knew your father. The treatment they're offering your daughter isn't ready. Meet me at the old SpaceX facility in Fremont. 1 hour. Bring the USB drive. I'll tell you everything. I looked at Dakota. It's a trap, she said. I exhaled. Maybe. But what choice did I have? I looked down at Lily, burning with fever. Whatever was happening, whatever my father had been working on, it was inside her now, and I was running out of time. I barely felt the rain as I stepped out of the car, the abandoned SpaceX facility looming ahead. The parking lot was mostly empty except for a few scattered puddles reflecting the streetlights. My phone vibrated in my pocket. Dakota's last text. Be careful. Lily's stable for now, but this feels wrong. If you're not back in 2 hours, I'm going public. I tucked my phone away and pushed forward, gripping the USB drive so tightly my knuckles ached. My father's research, his life's work, was in my hands. The front doors of the facility slid open with a quiet hiss. A security guard nodded. M.U. Chen, he's waiting for you in the research lab. My stomach twisted, but I nodded and stepped inside. The halls were dimly lit, sterile white lights casting long shadows. Dust-covered machinery lined the walls, massive structures hidden beneath plastic sheets. It felt like walking through a graveyard of abandoned dreams. But my father's research wasn't abandoned. It had been taken. And now, I needed to know why. I followed the corridor until it opened up into a brightly lit lab. Elon Musk stood in front of a large monitor, his back to me. You came alone? He asked, without turning around. You didn't, I countered. I had counted at least 4 security cameras tracking my movements. And behind the glass walls, dark figures lurked in the shadows, watching. He sighed and finally faced me. Up close, He looked different from the man in the restaurant. He was exhausted. Shadows lined his face, his eyes sharp but tired. "Your father was brilliant," he said. "He saw possibilities no one else did. His neural interface wasn't just about connecting minds to machines. It was about rewriting life itself. And you stole it." His jaw tightened. "He came to me for funding. He was close to a breakthrough, but there were complications. Other investors got involved. They didn't share his vision. They wanted control," I said. He exhaled heavily. "Yes, and now they have it." He turned back to the monitor and tapped a few keys. A series of images flickered onto the screen. Medical scans, brain activity readings, genetic sequencing models. But what made my stomach turn were the people. Rows of hospital beds. Patients hooked up to machines, their eyes open but unfocused, their bodies still. "These are the test subjects," Musk said quietly. "The first recipients of the neural interface. What's wrong with them?" My voice shook. "The interface works," he said, "but it does more than just heal genetic disorders. It changes something in the brain. It disconnects them." "From what?" He hesitated. "From reality." I took a step back, my heart hammering. "You offered this to my daughter," I whispered. "I didn't," he snapped, frustration flashing across his face. "I tried to stop them. The messages you got, the warnings, the emails that disappeared. That was me. The people funding this, they don't care about the consequences. They only care about control." My hands trembled as I looked at the screen again. "They're trying to rewrite human consciousness," I breathed. "They already have," Musk said grimly, "but we can stop them." He turned to me, his eyes intense. "You saw something on that tablet, didn't you? Something you recognized." I thought back to the symbols, the strange characters hidden in the schematics. They had seemed oddly familiar, like something from my childhood. Then it clicked. "They're not random," I murmured. "They're based on my mother's calligraphy. My father used to hide messages in them when I was a kid." Musk nodded. "He hid something in the interface, something we haven't been able to crack, a failsafe. To stop this from happening," I whispered. He handed me a tablet. "We need you to decode it." I hesitated. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Dakota. "Lily's worse. Hospital's not an option anymore. Running out of time." My breath hitched. This was it. The moment that changed everything. I looked at the screen, and I started to work. The symbols unfolded before me like a forgotten language. My father had always said the mind and the heart had to work together. Now, I finally understood what he meant. His code wasn't just science, it was art. And hidden in the lines of numbers and neural pathways, I found it. The failsafe. A sequence that could reverse the damage. "This is it," I breathed. "This is what they were looking for." But before Musk could respond, alarms blared through the facility. Red emergency lights flashed. A security guard burst into the room. "Sir, we have a situation." The doors to the lab slammed open. Men in suits flooded in, their faces cold, controlled. And behind them, a woman stepped forward. She was older, her dark hair pulled into a severe bun, dressed in an expensive suit that screamed power. "This has gone far enough," she said, her voice like ice. Musk's expression darkened. "You don't belong here, Evelyn." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You made a mistake, Elon, letting her in, letting her see." She turned her gaze to me. "Miss Chen, you have something that belongs to us." I clutched the tablet to my chest. "You're using this to control people," I said. "My father designed this to heal, not to manipulate." Her smile widened. Control is healing, my dear. People are messy, emotional, irrational. Imagine a world where no one suffers. No conflict. No pain. We can build that world. By turning people into puppets? By guiding them, she corrected smoothly. The interface works best when the mind is compliant. My stomach turned. Musk stepped forward. You're not getting this technology. She raised an eyebrow. And how exactly do you plan to stop us? The men in suits moved closer. I swallowed hard. Then I had an idea. I pulled out my phone and dialed. Dakota picked up immediately. Start the live stream. The moment I said it, Evelyn's expression flickered. What are you doing? She snapped. Telling the truth. Musk tapped a few keys, and suddenly, the screens behind us lit up with data. Medical scans, test subject footage, the entire research archive. The live feed was broadcasting everything. Within seconds, my face and the story were plastered across the internet. Evelyn's composure cracked. Shut this down, she barked. But it was too late. The world was watching. The truth was out. Musk turned to me, something like respect in his eyes. Your father would be proud. My phone buzzed again. A text from Dakota. Lily's fever broke. She's waking up. Whatever you did, it worked. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. We had won. But this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about everyone. And this was just the beginning. The world didn't change overnight. Even after the live stream went viral, even after the news cycle picked up the story and turned me from a fired waitress into an unwilling whistleblower, there were still battles to fight. But we had taken the first step. I left the SpaceX facility that night shaken, exhausted, but determined. Dakota was waiting for me at a safe house with Lily, and the first thing I did when I saw my daughter awake, truly awake, was collapse onto my knees and hold her close. Mommy, she whispered, her voice weak but clear. I had the strangest dreams. I swallowed back the lump in my throat. I know, baby, but you're safe now. But safe was a relative term. The people funding this, people like Evelyn, the hidden investors who had bankrolled Neuralink's darkest experiments, they weren't going to just disappear. But neither was the truth. Chot-teet-teet. Chag the backlash came fast and hard. Within hours, number release Chen files was trending worldwide. Journalists dug into Neuralink's funding sources, politicians demanded investigations, and human rights organizations called for hearings on the ethical dangers of neural interfaces. But the most immediate consequence? The investment group backing Neuralink, the same people who had tried to erase me, began hemorrhaging money. Public outrage had consequences. And Musk, despite all his power, was forced to make a choice. 3 days after the live stream, he held a press conference. Neuralink was meant to be a tool for progress, he said, standing behind a podium, looking more like the restless, sleepless man I had met in the restaurant than the billionaire CEO. But progress without oversight is dangerous. The technology we developed has the potential to heal, but in the wrong hands, it could do something far worse. I want to be clear. The research stolen from Dr. James Chen was never meant to be weaponized. And as of today, I am making all of it public. The fail-safe Miss Chen uncovered will be integrated into all existing neural interface technology to prevent misuse. This technology should belong to the world, and now it does. That should have been the end of it, but I knew better. Evelyn and her investors didn't just vanish. They would be back in some new form, with a new name, a new project, trying again, but so would we. 1 month later, I walked into a new building. Not a restaurant, not a courtroom, but a research institute. The Chen Institute for Neural Research. Funded by Musk, overseen by scientists who weren't beholden to corporations, and dedicated to making sure my father's work could never be exploited again. I stood in a quiet hallway, watching Lily play in the waiting room while Dr. Wong examined the latest batch of recovered test subjects. One of them, Sarah Martinez, a teacher who had vanished years ago, was beginning to regain awareness. The process was slow, but it was happening. Healing takes time. Progress takes time. But it was real. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving. I was building something better. Miss Chen? A voice interrupted my thoughts. I turned to see a young intern standing in the doorway. They're ready for you in the press room. I exhaled, glanced one last time at Lily, who was beaming as she showed off a drawing to a nurse, then walked inside. Reporters from around the world were waiting. I adjusted the microphone, took a deep breath, and spoke. My father believed that healing couldn't be forced, I said. That true progress has to respect our choices, our humanity, our freedom. Today, we take a step toward making sure that vision is protected. Not just for Lily, not just for me, but for everyone. And as the cameras flashed, as the world listened, I knew that, at last, his work was exactly where it was meant to be. After the press conference, I stepped outside into the bright afternoon light. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe. Lily ran up to me, her little arms wrapping around my waist. Mommy, you were on TV again. I laughed, kneeling down to cup her face. I know, sweetheart. How do I look? She tilted her head, pretending to think. Like a superhero. My heart clenched. Not long ago, I was just a tired waitress trying to keep the lights on, trying to keep my daughter alive. Now, people whispered my name with admiration. Journalists called me a whistleblower. Activists called me a hero. But I didn't feel like a hero. Heroes save the day. I had only bought us time. As I held Lily close, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I expected a reporter, a government official, maybe even Musk. But when I checked the screen, my breath caught. An unknown number. You think this is over? I swallowed hard, my fingers tightening around my phone. A second text came through. The technology is already out there. We will finish what we started. I turned, scanning the street. Nothing suspicious, nothing out of place. But I knew better than to believe that. This wasn't over. Not even close. That night, after putting Lily to bed, I sat at my small desk, staring at my father's old notebook. I traced my fingers over his handwriting, over the same symbols that had changed everything. Somewhere, someone was still trying to use his work for the wrong reasons. And I had a choice to make. I could move on, take the money, raise my daughter, live quietly. Or I could fight. Not just for Lily, not just for the people already affected, but for everyone who would be next. I closed the notebook, stood up, picked up my phone, and called Dakota. I need your help, I said. She didn't hesitate. Tell me when and where. I looked out the window, at the world that had changed so much in the past month, at the storm still brewing on the horizon. We start now. The next morning, I met Dakota in a quiet cafe on the outskirts of the city. No cameras, no reporters, just two people who had seen too much and knew we couldn't walk away. She already had her laptop open when I arrived, fingers tapping furiously on the keyboard. "You look like you haven't slept," I said, sliding into the booth across from her. She snorted. "Neither have you." "Fair enough." She turned the screen toward me. "So, I did some digging after that text you got. The investment group that funded the Neuralink experiments? Officially, they pulled out after the scandal. Unofficially, their money is still flowing into shell companies, offshore accounts, and look at this." She clicked on a folder, pulling up a document. A new patent application for a medical neural interface. Filed under a different company name. Different leadership. But the technology? It was the same. I exhaled slowly. "They're moving forward." Dakota nodded. "And they're doing it quietly. No press, no announcements. They learned from last time." My hands curled into fists. "So we expose them again." Dakota smirked. "I thought you'd say that." She turned her screen again. "I tracked down one of the doctors who worked on the Neuralink trials. He disappeared after everything went public. But I found him." She pulled up a photo. Dr. Benjamin Lasker. His address was listed underneath. "He knows what happened to the test subjects," Dakota said. "If we get him to talk, we might have enough evidence to shut this whole thing down before they get another chance." I stared at the screen, at the address. It wasn't far. But if we found him, so could they. I glanced at Dakota. "You armed?" She grinned. "Always." We grabbed our things and left. Wanqui, we found Lasker in a rundown motel off the highway. He answered the door with bloodshot eyes and the unmistakable look of a man who hadn't trusted the world in a long time. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, peering at us through the small gap in the door. Dakota flashed her press badge. "We're the ones keeping you alive, actually." He hesitated, then sighed and stepped back, letting us inside. The room was a mess. Half-packed suitcases, empty coffee cups, a loaded handgun on the nightstand. Lasker sank into the chair by the window, rubbing his temples. "I figured someone would find me eventually," he muttered. "Didn't expect it to be you." "You worked on the interface trials," I said, cutting straight to the point. "You know what happened to those patients?" He let out a hollow laugh. "Yeah, I know." He reached for a crumpled file on the table, flipping it open. Inside were grainy medical scans, brain activity reports. "The interface wasn't just rewriting neural pathways," he said, tapping the papers. "It was overriding them, changing the way the brain interprets reality. Not just curing diseases, reprogramming people." My stomach turned. "So the investment group still wants to move forward?" I asked. He scoffed. "Of course they do. You think they were ever in this for medical breakthroughs?" He gestured to the reports. "They don't want to fix people. They want to own them." I swallowed hard. "Can you prove it?" Dakota asked. Lasker hesitated, then sighed. "Yeah, I kept records. They'll come after me if I release them, though." I met his gaze. "They're already coming after us." He stared at me for a long moment. Then, finally, he nodded. "Then let's burn the whole damn thing down." We spent the next 48 hours in a safe house, compiling every piece of evidence Lasker had. Medical records, financial trails, internal emails from the investment group detailing their next steps. We had enough to make the world pay attention. The question was, how long could we stay ahead of them? The answer came that night, when someone tried to kill us. The first gunshot shattered the motel window. Glass rained down over the bed where Lasker had been sitting seconds earlier. "Get down!" Dakota shouted, pulling her gun. I grabbed Lasker, dragging him toward the bathroom as another shot tore through the walls. "They found us!" Lasker gasped, his face pale with fear. "No kidding," Dakota fired back, her expression grim. "We need to move. Now." We barely made it out, jumped out the back window, sprinted into the alley. A black SUV screeched to a halt at the curb. But this time, we were ready. I pulled out my phone, hit send on the file we had compiled. Within seconds, every journalist, every government watchdog, every activist group we could reach had the evidence. This time, there would be no cover-up. The gunman realized too late. The driver cursed, slamming the door as the SUV peeled away. They knew. They had lost. 3 days later, the headlines were everywhere. New whistleblower leaks expose illegal human trials in neural interface research. Global investigation launched into tech giants accused of experimenting on unwitting patients. Neuralink investors flee as scandal deepens. We had done it. The investment group was collapsing. The remaining test subjects were being placed in proper medical care. The world was watching now, and they weren't going to let this happen again. And me? I finally took Lily home. I held her close, breathed in her warmth, her laughter, the way she smiled up at me like I had done something amazing, like I was a hero. Maybe, just this once, I let myself believe it. But I also knew this fight wasn't over. Technology was always evolving. So was greed. But so were we. And as long as people like Evelyn existed, people who thought they could play God with human lives, I would be there, waiting, watching, ready to stop them. Because no one else was coming. It was up to us. And we weren't done yet. A week after the final exposé, I sat in my tiny apartment, watching the world react. News outlets were still dissecting the leaked documents, governments were announcing new regulations on neural interface research, and people were protesting outside the corporate offices of the investment group that had nearly gotten away with everything. They weren't getting away with it now. Arrests were already happening. Not just low-level employees, but high-ranking executives, people who had hidden in the shadows for years. Evelyn was still out there, but the pressure was mounting. Her name was all over the reports. She wouldn't stay hidden forever. But for now, for the first time in what felt like forever, I let myself breathe. "Mommy, can we go to the park today?" Lily stood in the doorway to my tiny bedroom, her arms crossed, trying her best to look serious. She was feeling better. Her color had returned, her rash had faded, and she wasn't waking up in the middle of the night anymore. The experimental treatment, the real one, not the rushed, dangerous version the investment group had planned, had worked. Darifer Wong had confirmed it. Her body had accepted the interface, allowing her genetic disorder to correct itself naturally. She was healthy. For the first time in her life, she was truly healthy. "Yeah, baby," I said, forcing myself to smile. "Let's go to the park." The park was quiet in the early afternoon, just a few families scattered across the playground. Lily ran ahead, laughing as she climbed onto the jungle gym, her energy limitless in a way that still amazed me. I sat on a bench, watching her. Dakota slid into the seat next to me, sipping on an iced coffee. "So," she said, stretching out her legs. "What now?" I exhaled. "I don't know." She glanced at me. Liar. I smirked. She wasn't wrong. I did know. I just didn't want to say it out loud yet. But the truth was, I couldn't walk away. Not when I knew what was still out there. "They're going to try again," I murmured, watching the sunlight filter through the trees. "Of course they are," Dakota said. "You don't just shut down a multi-billion-dollar experiment and expect the people behind it to just quit. So we stay ahead of them." She grinned. "That's the plan." "Yeah." I shook my head, laughing softly. "You know, a month ago I was just a waitress," I said. "I had no idea any of this was happening. I had no idea what my father had created. I was just trying to survive. And now?" I looked at Lily. "Now, I know what I have to do." Dakota nodded like she had expected that answer. She pulled something from her bag and slid it onto the bench between us. A file. "I took the liberty of digging around some more," she said. I hesitated, then flipped it open. Documents. Reports. Names. New research. New companies. New funding sources. They were already starting again. "Jesus," I muttered. "They don't waste time, do they?" "Nope," Dakota said, popping the pea. "So, what do you say?" I exhaled, feeling the weight of the decision settle in my chest. I had never asked for any of this, but fate had a way of putting people exactly where they needed to be. And right now, this was exactly where I needed to be. I picked up the file, my grip tightening. Let's get to work. As we walked out of the park, I glanced back at Lily one last time. She was running through the grass, arms stretched wide, laughing into the wind. Alive. Free. And because of that, because of everything that had happened, I was never going to stop fighting. Not for her. Not for the people they had already hurt. Not for the people they would come for next. Because this wasn't just my story anymore. It was a war. And we had just won the first battle. A month passed, then another. The media storm faded. The headlines moved on. But the war didn't stop. I had stepped into something bigger than I ever imagined, and now there was no walking away. Dakota and I worked quietly, following the money, tracking new names, exposing connections before they had a chance to rebuild. The investment group had been crippled, but not destroyed. Evelyn had gone underground, and we knew she was planning something. But she wasn't the only one. The world was watching now. Governments had started placing restrictions on neural interface research. Ethical review boards were forming, and scientists were beginning to question what they had once accepted as inevitable progress. People were waking up. But the people in power? They didn't go down easy. It was 2 a.m. when my phone buzzed. I blinked awake, heart already pounding. Another threat? Another warning? But when I picked up, it wasn't a text. It was a call, a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. But something told me to answer. I pressed the phone to my ear. Silence. Then, "Miss Chen," a familiar voice murmured. I went cold. "Evelyn." A soft chuckle. "Good. You remember me?" I sat up, already scanning the dark apartment, my instincts screaming at me. "What do you want?" "Oh, Maisie." She sighed like we were old friends. "You should know by now that it's not about what I want. It's about what's inevitable." I gritted my teeth. "The research is public now. The world knows. You lost." "Did I?" There was something in her tone, something that made my stomach twist. "You were so focused on stopping us from rolling out the interface, you forgot to ask yourself the real question," she continued. My grip tightened on the phone. "And what's that?" "Who's going to use it first?" The line went dead. I stared at my phone, my pulse roaring in my ears. "Shit," I whispered. She was right. We had shut them down. But the technology, it was out there now. Free. And in the wrong hands, it could still be just as dangerous. I grabbed my laptop, already dialing Dakota. "What the hell is going on?" she groaned as she picked up. "We have a problem," I said, fingers flying over the keyboard. I opened a news site, then another. And then I saw it. A quiet press release buried under the usual headlines. A new neural interface trial. Different company, different branding, but the same technology. They're moving forward, I whispered. Dakota cursed. Where? I scanned the article. Then my stomach dropped. London. Silence. Then, so, Dakota said, when do we leave? I exhaled, looking back at Lily, sleeping peacefully in her bed. I had fought so hard to keep her safe. But if I let this happen, if I let Evelyn and the people like her keep pushing forward, there wouldn't be a safe place left. Not for Lily, not for anyone. I looked back at my screen. I already knew the answer. First flight out, I said. And just like that, the fight began again. Because some battles end. But wars never do. 2 days later, Dakota and I were sitting in the back of a cab, weaving through the narrow streets of London. The sky was overcast, the air thick with the scent of rain, and my pulse hadn't stopped hammering since we landed. You sure about this? Dakota asked, her voice low. I looked at the printed article in my hands. The new neural interface trials were being hosted by a company called Novatech Industries, a clean, sterile name, completely disconnected from Neuralink and the investment group. But it wasn't fooling anyone. They changed the name, but it's the same people, I murmured. Same funding, same technology. So we blow it up before they get a chance to test it. Not literally, I said, eyeing her. She smirked. Not yet. I exhaled, staring out the window as the city blurred past. This was different from before. Back home, we had been running, reacting. This time, we were ahead of them. This time, we had a plan. The first step was getting inside. Novatech's headquarters was in a sleek, glass skyscraper in Canary Wharf, security tighter than a government building. But their test site? A private medical facility, tucked away in the countryside, hidden behind layers of corporate secrecy. That was our target. Got us 2 guest passes, Dakota said, tossing a pair of ID badges onto the cafe table where we had set up for the night. I picked mine up, studying it. A fake identity, complete with an official-looking photo and clearance credentials. How? I asked. She grinned. Let's just say Novatech's HR department needs better cybersecurity. I shook my head, but I wasn't complaining. We had our way in. Now, we just had to figure out what the hell they were planning. The next morning, we walked through the front doors of the Novatech Research Center, dressed in freshly pressed lab coats, trying to look like we belonged. Act bored, Dakota muttered. Bored? Yeah. Scientists always look bored. I resisted the urge to roll my eyes. The facility was pristine. White walls, glass partitions, security cameras in every corner. Employees moved in and out of labs, their faces expressionless, their eyes glued to tablets. We had studied the blueprints the night before. The real research wasn't happening in the main building, it was happening underground. We made our way down a restricted hallway, passing doors labeled with technical jargon, neurobiological synchronization lab, cognitive enhancement trials, until we found the stairwell leading to the lower levels. This is it, I whispered. Dakota glanced around, then swiped the stolen access card. The door clicked open. We slipped inside. The underground facility was different, colder, quieter. Rows of private rooms, each with a thick glass observation window. I moved closer to the nearest one, my stomach twisting. Inside, a man sat strapped to a chair, electrodes attached to his temples. His eyes were open, but vacant, his hands twitching slightly against the restraints. A heart monitor beeped steadily beside him, but something was wrong. His brain scan, displayed on a monitor above his head, was fluctuating in erratic patterns, like something was actively rewriting his neural pathways. "Holy shit," Dakota muttered. I swallowed hard. They're already testing it. Before we could process that horrifying fact, voices echoed down the hall. "Move," I hissed, grabbing Dakota's sleeve and pulling her into the nearest side room. We pressed against the wall, holding our breath as footsteps passed by. "Trials are progressing ahead of schedule," a clipped, familiar voice said. I froze. Evelyn. She was here. "We should begin Phase 2 by next week," she continued. "Initial cognitive recalibration has been successful. The subject's resistance levels are decreasing." My stomach turned. Resistance levels. They weren't just testing the interface. They were testing control. I gritted my teeth, hands shaking with anger. "If we can achieve full synchronization," another voice responded, "we'll be able to override behavioral pathways entirely." "Good," Evelyn said. "Prepare the next round of candidates. We move forward immediately." Their footsteps faded down the hall. I let out a slow breath. Dakota met my eyes. "We have to stop this," she whispered. I nodded. "And this time, we don't just expose them." She arched an eyebrow. "What are you thinking?" I swallowed. "We shut it down. Permanently." Getting out of the facility was harder than getting in. Security was tightening, guards were patrolling the hallways. But we managed to slip out through a loading dock, hearts pounding as we hit the cold air. "This is bigger than last time," Dakota said as we climbed into the car. I nodded, gripping the steering wheel. "Yeah, but this time, we're not just playing defense." I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in weeks. Musk picked up on the first ring. "Miss Chen?" he said, his tone unreadable. "You were right," I said. "They never stopped, and now they're moving faster than ever." Silence. Then, "Send me everything." I hesitated. "You're still in?" I asked. "I didn't release your father's research just for someone else to twist it," he said. "This ends now." I exhaled. "Good, because we're taking the facility down." 3 nights later, we made our move. Musk had pulled strings to delay their next phase, tying them up in legal red tape just long enough for us to get inside. This time, we weren't pretending to be guests. This time, we were ghosts. Dakota handled the security system, looping camera feeds and disabling alarms as I made my way back to the underground labs. The moment I saw the test subjects strapped into their chairs, still trapped in the experiment, I knew what I had to do. I moved fast, disconnecting the machines, overriding the system. One by one, the monitors shut down. The test subjects stirred, blinking in confusion as the fog in their minds began to lift. Then, alarms blared. "Damn it!" Dakota's voice crackled through my earpiece. "They're on to us." I turned to the nearest test subject, a young woman with wide, terrified eyes. "Can you walk?" I asked urgently. She nodded, shaky but determined. "Then, let's go." I helped her up, guiding her toward the exit. The others followed, some stumbling, some clutching their heads, but all awake. The doors burst open. Evelyn stood there, flanked by armed guards. "You just don't know when to quit, do you?" She sighed, tilting her head. "You're experimenting on people," I spat. "You don't get to lecture me about ethics." She smiled, but her eyes were cold. This was always going to happen. "Maisie, your father's research was too valuable to stay buried forever." He didn't build it for this, I snapped. Maybe not, she said. But we're past that now. I reached into my pocket. Pressed send. Behind me, the facility's servers were uploading every last piece of data to journalists, government agencies, the entire world. Evelyn's face darkened as her phone buzzed. You think this ends with a leak? She hissed. I smiled grimly. No, I said, but it's a start. Sirens wailed in the distance. Police. Regulators. The world closing in. Evelyn's expression flickered. For the first time, she looked worried. We had won. Again. But I knew, as I led the test subjects to safety, that this wouldn't be the last time, because the fight wasn't over. Not yet. 3 days after the raid on Novatech's facility, the world was on fire. The leaked documents had done their job. The headlines were relentless. Human trials in unauthorized neural experimentation. Who is responsible? Neural interface scandal deepens as whistleblower exposes corporate conspiracy. Governments demand accountability. Global restrictions on neural research imminent. But it wasn't just the media. Public outcry was everywhere. Protests erupted outside Novatech's headquarters, outside government buildings, outside any institution that had ever funded projects like these. The people were angry, and this time they weren't letting it go. Evelyn had disappeared. Her name was all over the files, her involvement undeniable, but she had vanished before she could be arrested. She wasn't gone, though. I knew she was still out there, watching, waiting. But she wasn't the only one. You're on TV again, Dakota muttered, tossing a newspaper onto the cafe table between us. I barely glanced at it. You sound disappointed. She smirked. Please, I'm just mad they used my worst photo in the article. I exhaled, rubbing my temples. The past few days had been a blur of government meetings, interviews, and security briefings. The authorities were still sorting through the wreckage of Novatech's program, but the damage had already been done. We had stopped this project. But what about the next one? They'll try again, I murmured. Dakota's expression sobered. Yeah, she said, they will. We sat in silence for a long moment, watching the rain streak down the cafe windows. Then my phone buzzed. I tensed, expecting another threat, another anonymous warning. But it wasn't. It was a private message. From Elon Musk. We need to talk. Now. 2 hours later, I sat across from him in a quiet, upscale office. He looked tired, worn down in a way that even billions of dollars couldn't fix. They're still out there, he said without preamble. I nodded. Novatech is finished, but the technology isn't, he continued. You've made sure of that. But Evelyn and her people? They don't stop. They adapt. I frowned. What are you saying? He exhaled. They're regrouping, he said. Not in the private sector. Not in some hidden lab. They're going straight to the top. He slid a tablet across the table. Government documents. Classified proposals for integrating neural interfaces into national security programs. Military. Intelligence agencies, law enforcement, the same technology, the same dangers, just with a different name on the door. Jesus, I breathed. Musk leaned forward. You've exposed them twice. But now they're making a different play. They're going to push for government backing. And if that happens, there's no stopping it, I finished. His silence was answer enough. I stared at the screen, my pulse thudding. Evelyn had lost the battle. But now, she was going for the war. We need a plan, I said, pacing the small apartment later that night. Dakota leaned against the counter, arms crossed. We had a plan last time. It involved sneaking into a high-security facility and nearly getting shot. I shot her a look. "Got a better idea?" She sighed. "Maybe. We can't just keep playing defense. We need to control the narrative. Get ahead of them before they get too big to stop." I nodded. But that was easier said than done. We had pulled off 2 impossible wins. But this was different. This wasn't a hidden lab or a private corporation. This was the government. The kind of power that didn't answer to journalists or public pressure. If Evelyn got her way, neural interfaces wouldn't just be about manipulation anymore. They'd be about control. Nationwide, worldwide, every decision, every thought, monitored, shaped, guided, for security, for stability, for whatever excuse they needed. I sat down hard, my breath unsteady. "So," Dakota said, "how do we stop this?" I looked at her, then at the files Musk had given me, then at my phone, where a dozen missed calls from journalists sat unanswered. I swallowed hard. "We go public." Dakota raised an eyebrow. "Again?" "Not just an exposé, not just another leak." I took a deep breath. "We make it impossible for them to move forward. We go global. We force hearings, international intervention. We make sure that no country, no government, no corporation can touch this tech without the whole world watching." Dakota studied me for a long moment. Then she grinned. "God, I love when you get dramatic." The next morning, I called every journalist who had ever covered this story. I reached out to scientists, human rights organizations, activists, lawmakers, anyone who had been paying attention. I built a team. We weren't just whistleblowers anymore. We were a movement. A week later, the world was watching. I sat at a long table, cameras flashing around me, microphones pointed in my direction. A global hearing on neural technology misuse. "Miss Chen," a senator began, "you've risked everything to expose these programs. Do you really believe this technology can never be used ethically?" I exhaled. Then I looked straight into the camera. "Technology is never the problem," I said. "People are." Murmurs rippled through the room. "My father created this interface to heal people," I continued. "But in the wrong hands, it was turned into a tool for control. And now, those same people are trying to sell it as safety." I looked at the officials watching me. "I am here to make sure you don't let them." Silence. Then the questions started. That hearing was the beginning. Laws were passed. Restrictions were put in place. Entire government programs were shut down before they had a chance to begin. For now, at least. Evelyn was still out there. She would try again. But so would we. Months later, I stood in a quiet office overlooking the city, watching the sun set. "So," Dakota said, flopping onto my couch, "what do we do now?" I smiled. "We keep watching," I said. "We keep fighting. We make sure this never happens again." She smirked. "You really don't do things halfway, do you?" I shook my head. "Not when it comes to this, because I knew the truth. The fight never ends. There will always be people like Evelyn. But now, there will always be people like us. And as long as they tried to control the future, we'd be there to stop them." 6 months later, the world had changed. Neural interface technology was no longer a hidden weapon for the powerful. Governments had been forced to pass strict regulations. Whistleblower protections had expanded, and the public had become more aware than ever about the dangers of unchecked technological advancements. But I knew better than to believe That meant we had won. Because people like Evelyn never really disappear. They adapt. They evolve. And sure enough, I got the first sign of it on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. I was at the Chen Institute reviewing new research proposals when my phone buzzed. An encrypted message from an unknown sender. Project Aurora. Look into it before it's too late. My stomach clenched. I didn't recognize the name, but I recognized the feeling. This was how it always started. A whisper, a warning, a storm on the horizon. "You're sure about this?" Dakota asked, watching as I pulled up the encrypted message on my laptop later that night. I nodded. "We've been waiting for the next move. This is it." She sighed. "Well, it was nice pretending we had a normal life for a few months." I smirked. "Was it?" She grinned. "Not really." I clicked on the message, decrypting the file attached to it. What I saw made my blood run cold. A new company. A new technology. And Evelyn's name buried deep in the documentation. She was back. And she was already 3 steps ahead. The next day, I boarded a plane. Destination, Tokyo. That's where Project Aurora was based, where the next phase of neural experimentation was already beginning. This time, they weren't just targeting medical applications. They were going for something bigger. Autonomous neural connectivity. A system that didn't just integrate with the brain, it linked multiple minds together. Real-time data sharing. Instantaneous thought transmission. No privacy. No barriers. One step closer to erasing individual thought altogether. I landed in Tokyo just before dawn, my nerves on edge. Dakota had stayed behind to coordinate from the States, but I wasn't alone. I had reached out to old contacts, to people who had been following our work. A new ally was waiting for me at the airport. "Miss Chen?" a quiet voice said as I stepped through the terminal. I turned to see a young man in a dark suit, eyes sharp, movements precise. "You can call me Kenji," he said, extending a hand. "I think we have a common enemy." I shook his hand. "Then let's get to work." This wasn't just another fight. This was the next evolution. And if we didn't stop Project Aurora before it launched, we wouldn't just be fighting for control of technology. We'd be fighting for control of the human mind itself. And that was a war we couldn't afford to lose. The streets of Tokyo were alive with neon lights and the hum of late-night crowds. But my focus was locked on Kenji as we slid into the back of a black sedan. "How much do you know?" I asked as the driver pulled away from the airport. Kenji's expression didn't change. "Enough to know this is bigger than anything you've dealt with before." I waited. "Project Aurora isn't just about interfaces anymore," he continued. "It's about connectivity. Permanent, seamless mind-to-mind communication. No devices, no barriers. Just pure thought, transmitted instantly." I exhaled slowly, my pulse hammering. "And Evelyn?" Kenji's jaw tightened. "She's here. She's running the program under a different identity, backed by corporate and military investors. They're calling it the next phase of human evolution." I laughed bitterly. "More like the final phase of free will." Kenji nodded grimly. "Exactly. The first human trials start in 48 hours. I swore under my breath. This was worse than I thought. If Project Aurora succeeded, the neural interfaces wouldn't just be tools for control anymore. They would become the control. We spent the next 24 hours gathering intel. Kenji had connections, deep ones. He got us blueprints of the facility where the trials were being held, lists of test subjects, security protocols. But the most chilling discovery? Some of the test subjects weren't volunteers. They had been selected, acquired. This wasn't just a corporate experiment. This was human trafficking. Dakota called me in the middle of the night, her voice tight with anger. "They're taking people?" she demanded. "Yeah," I said, staring at the names on the screen in front of me. Displaced refugees, undocumented workers, people no one will miss. She swore violently. "Tell me we have a plan." I glanced at Kenji, who was already suiting up for the next phase. "We do," I said. "We stop the trials before they start, and we make sure the whole world sees what they're doing." The facility was located on the outskirts of the city, a sleek underground complex disguised as a biomedical research center. Security was tight, but we had a way in. Kenji had a contact inside, someone who had grown disillusioned with the project after seeing what was really happening. Her name was Dr. Kaori Tanaka. She met us in a dimly lit parking garage, glancing around nervously before handing us stolen access cards. "They're accelerating the process," she whispered. "If they succeed, the subjects will no longer have independent thought. Their neural pathways will be permanently linked." I swallowed hard. "Is there a way to reverse it?" Dr. Tanaka hesitated. "Maybe," she admitted, "but only if we stop them before the full synchronization occurs." I nodded. We only had one shot. Getting inside was easier than expected. Getting out was going to be the hard part. Kenji and I slipped past the first layers of security, moving quickly through the sterile white hallways. The test subjects were being kept in individual pods, their vitals monitored, their brain activity displayed on massive digital screens. And then I saw her, Sarah Martinez, one of the original Neuralink test subjects. Strapped to a chair, electrodes attached to her skull, her eyes fluttering as if trapped between reality and something else. "Oh my God," I whispered. Kenji followed my gaze. "You know her?" She was one of the first victims of the neural interface trials back in the US. She disappeared after the last takedown. I thought she was gone. But she wasn't gone. Evelyn had taken her. Rage surged through me. We needed to move fast. I reached for the control panel, ready to start disengaging the system. And then the alarms blared. They knew we were here. "Ta! We're out of time!" Kenji shouted over the sirens. I worked furiously, hands flying over the console, overriding the neural link protocol before it could complete synchronization. The test subjects began stirring. Some groaned, some gasped, but Sarah's eyes snapped open. "Where?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. I didn't have time to explain. "We're getting you out of here," I said, unstrapping her restraints. Heavy footsteps echoed down the hall. Evelyn, flanked by 2 armed guards, her expression unreadable. "Maisie," she said smoothly, "you just can't seem to stay out of my business." I stepped in front of Sarah, shielding her. "Your business is illegal human experimentation. Someone has to stop you." Evelyn tilted her head. "Is that what you think?" She motioned to the control panel, where lines of code flashed across the screen. "Do you even understand what you're interrupting?" she asked. "This is progress. The next step in human evolution." "This isn't progress," I spat. "This is enslavement." She sighed, like she was tired of explaining something to a child. "Free will is inefficient." "Maisie," she said, "imagine a world without war, without crime, without uncertainty, a unified consciousness. Don't you see? I'm saving humanity from itself." "By turning people into puppets?" I shot back. She shrugged. People want to be led. I'm simply giving them what they need. Kenji raised his gun. We're leaving, and you're not stopping us. Evelyn's smile didn't waver, but she did step aside. Take them, she said, motioning toward the test subjects. I have plenty more. Her confidence made my blood run cold. We had stopped this trial, but she was already thinking ahead. She was already planning the next phase. I clenched my fists. This isn't over, I warned. Evelyn smirked. It never is. We got the test subjects out, disappearing into the night before security reinforcements could arrive. Dr. Tanaka went public, exposing everything. The world reacted, again. Governments cracked down hard. Project Aurora was officially shut down, but Evelyn was still free. And as I watched the news cycle churn through another scandal, another corporate takedown, I knew she was already planning her next move. Dakota called me that night. So, she said, what's next? I exhaled, staring out over the Tokyo skyline. We watch. We wait. And when they try again, I clenched my jaw. We stop them. For good. Because Evelyn was right about one thing. This fight never ends. But neither do we. 6 months passed, then a year. Project Aurora was officially shut down. Evelyn was still a ghost in the system, but the world was more aware than ever. Governments had imposed stricter regulations, international watchdogs were formed, and the public had learned to be wary of any new breakthroughs in neural technology. But I knew better than to believe the fight was over. Because people like Evelyn, they never stop. They just change the rules. And sure enough, the next move came quietly, slipping through the cracks of bureaucracy and media distractions. I was at the Chen Institute, preparing for a panel discussion on ethical AI, when an urgent email landed in my inbox. Subject: Urgent. New neural interface trials under Cognitive Optimization Initiative. Attached were documents, names, research grants, funding from governments, not private investors. And at the bottom of the document, buried deep in the fine print, was a familiar name, Evelyn Carlyle. I swore under my breath. This time, she wasn't working in the shadows. This time, she had gone official. I don't get it, Dakota muttered, pacing the room as she scrolled through the leaked files. She spent years hiding. Why step into the spotlight now? Because she doesn't have to hide anymore, I said, my voice tight. She's legitimized the research. She has government approval. Kenji leaned against the desk, arms crossed, which means she's protected. No more sneaking into underground labs. This is happening in plain sight. I clenched my fists. This was worse than before. Before, we could expose her, make it too risky for investors to back her work, force her into retreat. But now she had legal backing. So what do we do? Dakota asked. I took a deep breath. We go after her from the inside. I got a meeting. It took weeks of pushing, of leveraging connections, of making just enough noise without tipping her off. But I got a meeting. Officially, it was a professional courtesy between the Chen Institute and the Global Cognitive Optimization Initiative. Unofficially, it was me walking straight into Evelyn's territory. The meeting was held in a sleek, high-rise office overlooking Washington, D.C. I walked in alone. No Dakota, no Kenji. Evelyn was already waiting, standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, watching the city below. Maisie, she greeted without turning. I was wondering when you'd show up. Evelyn, I said, keeping my voice steady. I see you've rebranded. She smiled, finally facing me. You can only fight progress for so long. Eventually, people see reason. I clenched my jaw. You mean you found a way to make them think they see reason? She laughed softly, as if amused by my persistence. You don't have to be on the outside anymore, Maisie, she said. Join us. Help shape this from within. We could do so much good. I stared at her, at the woman who had spent years trying to turn free will into an option instead of a right. If you really wanted to do good, I said, you wouldn't have to strip people of their autonomy to do it. Her smile faltered, just for a second. Then she exhaled, shaking her head. Such a waste. Yeah, I agreed. For you. I slid a drive across the table. This has everything I need to expose what you're doing, I said. All the buried research, all the hidden failures, the media, the regulators. Everyone will see it. Evelyn didn't flinch. She just looked at me, cool and collected. Do it then, she said. I narrowed my eyes. What's stopping you? She asked, tilting her head. I hesitated. She leaned in slightly, voice dropping to a whisper. You already know. Maisie, she said, you know that technology isn't the enemy? People are. And as long as humans make choices, they will keep choosing wrong. I hated that she made it sound so logical, so inevitable. I tightened my grip on the table. People deserve the right to choose, I said. She smiled again. We'll see. I left that meeting with more questions than answers, and, for the first time, I wasn't sure if exposing her would be enough. Because now, she had the whole world convinced she was right. And if we didn't find a way to stop her soon, she wouldn't need to steal free will. People would give it away willingly. That night, Dakota poured us both a drink, watching me carefully. You look like you've seen a ghost, she said. I exhaled. Worse. Worse than Evelyn? She arched an eyebrow. Yeah, I murmured. Worse than Evelyn. She waited. I stared at the city lights, at the world moving on, oblivious. We've been trying to stop her, I said, trying to block her research, expose her methods. Right. I turned to Dakota, my chest tight. But what if we're wrong? She frowned. Wrong about what? About how to fight this, I said. We keep playing defense. We keep reacting. But that's not working. Every time we stop one project, she starts another. Dakota nodded slowly. So what's the alternative? I swallowed hard. We build something better. She stared at me. You want to, what? Create a counter-interface? I shook my head. Not an interface. A choice. Maisie, Dakota said, her voice cautious. This is her game. We don't play it. We don't have a choice, I said. If we keep fighting her research, people will just keep looking for it. We need to give them something else to believe in. Dakota was silent. Then she downed her drink. So, she said finally, we out-innovate her. I nodded. And we make sure that when the time comes, I said, people choose us instead. The next day, I called Musk. I need your help, I said. He listened. Then, after a long pause, he spoke. I thought you might say that. I took a deep breath. This is going to change everything, I said. I know, he said. But you're right. If we want to win, we can't just fight her. We have to replace her. 6 months later, we unveiled the first prototype of the Open Neural Autonomy System. Fully decentralized, fully independent, A neural technology that enhanced cognition without control. A system that couldn't be manipulated, because no one owned it. Not a company, not a government, not a person. It belonged to everyone. The moment we launched, we knew we had changed the game, not just for Evelyn, but for the entire future of human consciousness. "So," Dakota said, watching the first wave of public reaction flood in. "Think this is enough?" I watched the headlines, the debates, the world scrambling to process what we had just done. "For now," I said, because Evelyn would come for this. But this time, she wasn't the only one shaping the future. And for the first time, we weren't just fighting back. We were leading the way. 6 months after we launched the Open Neural Autonomy System, the world had changed. Again, governments scrambled to understand it. Corporations tried to find ways to profit from it. Regulators debated whether something that belonged to everyone could even be controlled. But the people chose it. In record numbers, users adopted our decentralized neural interface. For the first time, a system existed that enhanced cognition, improved memory, and deepened human connection, without manipulation, without control, without Evelyn. But I knew better than to think she had disappeared. She was just waiting, and when her next move came, it came fast. It started as a whisper, small reports buried in tech forums and obscure research papers, anomalies in network activity, strange neural feedback loops in corporate research centers. Then, a wave of unexplained disruptions. People using other neural interfaces, the old ones, the proprietary ones, started experiencing something new. Not glitches, not malfunctions, but something much worse. External influences. Subtle, barely noticeable at first. Then undeniable. A shift in thought patterns. A change in priorities. And at the center of it all, Evelyn. "She's back," Dakota said, slamming her laptop shut. Kenji nodded grimly, "And she's not hiding this time." I leaned forward, my pulse pounding. "What's she doing?" Kenji hesitated. "She's infiltrating," he said, "not by force. Not by secrecy, but by trust." He turned his screen toward me. A global press conference. Evelyn Carlisle, CEO of Aeon Mind Systems, standing at a podium, smiling. Introducing the next evolution of neural technology. Her voice played through the speakers, smooth and measured. "We've spent years fearing neural advancements, questioning progress. But today, I am here to offer something revolutionary. True, guided optimization. Real-time cognitive alignment, ensuring that every mind operates at its highest potential. This is not control. This is clarity. A world without conflict, without uncertainty, where every decision is the right one." The audience erupted in applause. I stared at the screen, my hands clenched. "She's not hiding anymore," I whispered. Dakota nodded. "She doesn't have to. People are choosing this." Aeon Mind Systems grew fast. Within weeks, millions of people opted in. Companies, governments, entire nations began exploring partnerships. Evelyn had done what we never thought possible. She had packaged control as a gift, and people were lining up to take it. "This is different," Kenji said, pacing the room. "Yeah," Dakota muttered, "because this time, she's not forcing it. She's making it desirable." I exhaled sharply. "Then, we have to make them see the truth." We went public. We exposed everything. The hidden networks, the covert influence patterns embedded in Aeon's technology, the subtle nudges guiding users toward optimal decisions. It wasn't mind control, it was mind suggestion, and it was working. But the response wasn't what we expected. Motutuantu. You're overreacting, one news anchor argued. This is just technology improving decision-making, another expert debated. So what if it influences thoughts? A public figure shrugged on social media. If it makes people better, what's the harm? I felt the world tilting under me. This wasn't like before. Before, people fought back. But now, they were embracing it. Evelyn wasn't just winning. She was changing what winning even meant. So, Dakota said one night, her voice quiet, "What do we do now?" I stared at the skyline, my thoughts racing. The old strategy wasn't enough. Exposure, leaks, public outcry, none of it mattered anymore. Evelyn had learned. She had evolved. And now we had to evolve too. I turned to Dakota, my chest tightening. "We do what she's doing," I said. She blinked. "What?" "We don't just fight her," I said. "We replace her." For months, we worked in secret. Not just on countermeasures, not just on exposure, but on something new. A real alternative. Because we finally understood the truth. People don't just want freedom. They want guidance. They want support. And if we didn't give them something better, they would keep choosing her. We launched it quietly. Not a competitor to Eon, but something different. A human-centric neural framework. A system that enhanced cognition without shaping thought. That optimized without overriding. That amplified free will instead of eroding it. We called it Solus. Not an interface, an ecosystem. And within weeks, people started choosing us. Because for every person who wanted control, there were 10 more who wanted to keep their humanity. And that was something Evelyn could never understand. "Think this is enough?" Dakota asked, as we watched Solus gain momentum. I exhaled. "For now," I said, because I knew Evelyn. She wasn't done. She would never be done. But this time, we weren't just playing defense. We weren't just stopping her. We were beating her. Not by taking her down, but by giving the world something better, something real, something she couldn't control. And as long as we kept fighting, she never would. 6 months after we launched Solus, something happened that I never expected. Evelyn disappeared. Not in the way she had before. Not slipping into the shadows to regroup, not rebranding under a different corporate banner. She was gone. No press conferences, no announcements. Aeon Mind Systems continued operating, but Evelyn herself had vanished. No interviews, no appearances. It was like she had erased herself. And that scared me more than anything. "It's a trap," Dakota said, staring at the news. "Maybe," I murmured, but my gut told me something else. Evelyn had spent her whole life controlling the game. She didn't just walk away. She was waiting. For what? I didn't know. But I was going to find out. Kenji dug into Eon's systems, searching for signs of her. Dakota reached out to contacts in government, tech, media, anyone who might have a lead. But every thread led to the same answer. Evelyn Carlisle was gone. Until one night, when I got a message, an encrypted video file. No sender, no traceable origin, just a single subject line. "We need to talk." I hesitated before opening it. Then I hit play. Evelyn's face filled the screen. She looked different. Not polished. Not composed. She looked tired, older, but her voice was the same. Calm, measured. "Congratulations, Maisie. You won." I tensed. "Solus is thriving. People believe in it, and for now, they believe in you. But you and I both know something you haven't admitted yet. Something you don't want to face." She leaned closer to the camera. "You're becoming me." My breath caught. You tell yourself you're giving people a choice, but you're shaping their choices, influencing them, guiding them. Isn't that what I did? No. No, it wasn't the same. She controlled. I offered, right? We both wanted to save the world, Maisie. The only difference is, you still think you're the hero. The screen went black. I sat there for a long time, staring, thinking. I didn't tell Dakota right away. I didn't tell Kenji, because some part of me was afraid they'd see what I saw, what I couldn't ignore. Was she right? Was I just another version of her? Had I spent so much time fighting Evelyn that I had become her? Solus kept growing. It was everything we had promised. Decentralized, ethical, free. But people trusted it. Trusted me. And trust is power. And power is a dangerous thing. Cha-ta-ti-chan. One night, I stood on the rooftop of the Chen Institute watching the city lights. Dakota found me there. "You've been quiet," she said. I exhaled. "If I told you something," I asked, "would you be honest with me?" She smirked. "Have I ever not been?" I hesitated. Then I told her about the message, about Evelyn's words, about the fear growing inside me. When I finished, she didn't answer right away. Then, "Do you believe her?" I swallowed. "I don't know." Dakota studied me. Then she sighed. "You're not her, Maisie." "How do you know?" She tilted her head. "Because you're asking that question." I looked away. "Listen," she continued. "You built something different, something people actually chose, instead of something forced onto them." "But what if it's still control?" I whispered. She was quiet for a long time. Then she shook her head. "You know what I think?" "What?" "I think Evelyn lost," Dakota said. "But she found one last way to get inside your head." I clenched my jaw. "She wants you to doubt yourself," Dakota continued, "because that's the only way she can win now." I exhaled, staring at the skyline. Maybe she was right. Maybe she wasn't. But one thing was clear. The fight wasn't over. Because the fight never ends. 3 weeks later, another message arrived. This time, there was no video, just 2 words. "It's starting." No sender. No location. But I knew who it was from. I knew what it meant. And as I stared at those words, I realized something. Evelyn wasn't gone. She was waiting, watching, preparing for whatever came next. And so was I, because whatever she had planned, whatever came next, I'd be ready. 3 months after Evelyn's last message, the world was quieter than it should have been. Too quiet. Solus was still growing. People still believed in it. Governments still debated its implications. But something in the air had shifted. Something felt wrong. And then it happened. It started with one glitch. A single Solus user posting online about strange, intrusive thoughts. Not their own. Not like a memory lapse. Not like a dream. But someone else's thoughts. Then another. Then a dozen. then thousands. Chom. It's a smear campaign, Dakota said, pacing as she read through the reports. Maybe, I murmured, but my gut told me otherwise. Kenji looked up from his screen, his face pale. It's not a campaign, he said. It's real. I tensed. What do you mean? He turned his laptop toward me. Lines of code flashed across the screen. Solus infrastructure logs. This isn't our system, he said. This is something else. Something inside Solus. My stomach turned to ice. Someone's hijacking it, he continued. Someone's feeding external input into Solus neural pathways. I clenched my fists. Evelyn. It took us a full day to track the source. When we found it, my worst fears were confirmed. Aeon Mind Systems had built a secondary layer within Solus. Something invisible, undetectable. Something that had been waiting, lurking, until Evelyn decided it was time to turn it on. I stared at the data, barely breathing. She built a backdoor into our system, I whispered. Dakota cursed. She let us think we won. Let us build Solus, then waited until enough people were connected before she hijacked it. Kenji ran a hand through his hair. This isn't just hijacking. This is merging. I blinked. What? He pointed to the code. She's not just injecting thoughts into Solus. She's syncing it with her system, with Aeon, slowly, subtly, so no one notices. My blood ran cold. What happens if she succeeds? I asked. Kenji swallowed hard. Then Solus becomes Aeon. It was the perfect move. She knew we wouldn't fight her head-on anymore, so she didn't fight back. She let us build our alternative, let people trust it. Then, when we were all looking the other way, she made it hers. Chidi Kyame too. We have to shut Solus down, I said. Dakota stared at me. Are you serious? If we don't, we lose everything, I said. If Solus gets fully integrated into Aeon, we won't be able to undo it. It'll be permanent. Kenji exhaled sharply. But if we shut it down now, we leave people with no alternative, Dakota finished. I clenched my jaw. We have to warn them, I said. We have to tell them the truth. Let them choose for themselves. But even as I said it, I knew. Evelyn had already accounted for that. The moment we announced the threat, the pushback was immediate. Not just from corporations, from the public. Why would Solus sabotage itself? This is just fear-mongering. Who cares if it's merging? If it works, it works. Evelyn was right. Maybe free will is overrated. I read the messages, the news articles, the debates, and I realized we weren't just fighting her anymore. We were fighting every single person who wanted this, who wanted their decisions made for them, who wanted to believe Evelyn's version of reality was the better one. So what now? Dakota asked. I exhaled. We burn it down. Kenji worked through the night, building a kill switch, a final failsafe, something that would completely and permanently erase Solus before it could be taken over. But it had to be done manually, inside Solus's primary servers, which meant one thing. I had to go in myself. The facility was located deep underground, built to withstand cyber attacks, system failures, anything that could compromise the network. Anything except me. I stepped into the server room, my hands shaking. Once I did this, there was no going back. Solus would be gone. The world would have no alternative, but at least it wouldn't be hers. Then my earpiece crackled. "Evelyn!" "You don't have to do this, Maisie," her voice murmured. I stiffened. "You don't get to decide that." "Don't I?" Her voice was soft, almost genuine. "You've already lost," she said. "You know that. Even if you shut Solus down, people will come back to me. Because deep down, they don't want freedom. They want comfort." I closed my eyes. "You're wrong," I whispered. "Am I?" she challenged. "Then why are they fighting you? Why aren't they rallying behind your cause?" I clenched my fists. "Because you made them afraid." "No," she said simply. "I made them understand." I swallowed hard. "Pull the trigger, Maisie," she said. "But it won't change a thing." I took a breath, looked at the final command line on the terminal. One keystroke. One decision. Evelyn was right about one thing. People wanted comfort. They wanted certainty. But that didn't mean I had to give up. That didn't mean she had to win. I pressed the key. Solus was gone. The entire system collapsed in a single instant. Millions of users disconnected. The network wiped. Evelyn was silent. Then, softly, "Well played." The earpiece went dead. I walked out of the facility, the weight of it crushing me. Dakota met me at the exit, eyes wide. "It's done?" I nodded. "Then what do we do now?" I exhaled. "We build something new. Again. Again. And again. And again." Because Evelyn was right about one thing. This fight never ends. But neither do we. The moment Solus shut down, everything changed. The world went dark for a fraction of a second, then rebooted into something new. The neural connections severed. The silent influence gone. Millions of people who had unknowingly been drifting under Evelyn's design were suddenly free. Confused, disoriented, but free. The public backlash was immediate. People demanded answers, demanded justice. Investigations were launched. Media outlets that once praised Aeon mind systems were now tearing it apart. Lawsuits piled up. Governments distanced themselves. And Evelyn? She fell. But not in the way I expected. I thought she would fight. I thought she had another contingency, another layer of control. But when the world turned on her, when her carefully constructed empire began to crumble, she didn't run. She didn't resist. She disappeared. But this time, she wasn't hiding. This time, she had nowhere left to go. They found her weeks later, alone, in a quiet, abandoned safe house outside Geneva. No security, no elaborate escape plan. Just Evelyn Carlyle sitting in an empty room staring at nothing. She had lost everything. Not just power, purpose. She had built a world where she was always 3 steps ahead, always in control, always necessary. But now, the world had moved on. And for someone like her, that was worse than death. I didn't go see her. I thought about it. I thought about standing in front of her, looking into her eyes, asking if she understood now, if she saw the truth. But I already knew the answer. She would never see it. Not really. Because Evelyn never believed she was wrong. She only believed she had failed. But the world didn't need her anymore, and that was her greatest punishment. As for me, I did what I always do. I started over. Not Solus, not another interface, not another system. Something new, something better. Because if this fight had taught me anything, it was that no technology could ever replace human choice. Not truly. And no battle for freedom ever really ends, because someone, somewhere, will always try to take it away. So we have to keep fighting. Again, and again, and again. But this time, I knew something Evelyn never did. People don't need to be controlled. They just need to be trusted. This is where my story leaves off. But the real story? The one out there? That's still being written. So now I ask you, what do you think? Do you believe people are meant to be free? Or do you think Evelyn was right? Would you choose comfort over control? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk about it. And if this story made you think, if it made you feel something, hit that like button. Share it. Because sometimes the smallest choices lead to the biggest changes. And maybe, just maybe, your choice is the one that changes everything.